just as you would purchase a new user or an additional module for your MIP product, you do the same sort of transaction as it relates to DrillPoint, either through an Abila CAM or through your partner. It is also means that support is provided by Abila. So you don't have to call us for DrillPoint support and call Abila for MIP support. You can call one number and get assistance in both areas. To date, we have more than actually 350 MIP customers using DrillPoint. And the product itself, we're finding really 5 critical areas that it's delivering benefits for these customers. First and foremost, it's delivering the information in an easily consumable format for those non-accountants using the Excel functionality that everybody's familiar with and is not too intimidating. It also is delivering this information in Excel in an interactive format so that managers not only are getting reports, but they can drill into the spreadsheet information that you're sending them, getting all the way back to source transaction detail. And that drill down is available no matter where you are in DrillPoint. You have drill down in every single report that you create in this product. Reports that used to take hours to build, things like board packets, things of that nature, can be built one time in DrillPoint, saved as an Excel spreadsheet, and then refreshed in minutes and distributed ahead of meetings, really minimizing the amount of time that your finance staff is spending preparing information and giving them more time to do more productive things like analyze the information. We're also able to, with DrillPoint, produce advanced reporting that's not available in the base MIP system. Robbie will cover quite a bit of that today, so he'll make sure to emphasize the areas that DrillPoint's delivering functionality you just don't have in the base reporting system. And best of all, if you're a good user of Excel and you're a good user of MIP reporting, you're going to be a great user of DrillPoint. We've tried to adhere to many of the logical ways that you build reports in base MIP in the way that you build reports in DrillPoint. So it's not a product that you have to be a technical guru in order to build powerful reports. And again, I think Robbie's presentation today will cover how easy it is to use the product. Okay, so getting to the end of the slides here, real quick, just to give you a sense of the licensing. The product itself is available both for the MIP Classic product as well as the MIP Advanced product. Whether it's in the cloud or on-premise, this product will work with either version. It installs very easily. Most cases, less than 10 minutes, you'll install this and you'll be ready to start building reports within DrillPoint. There is no data library that you have to build, very non-technical setup. Once it's installed, there are some security functions and some ties between your MIP logins and the DrillPoint, but once those are set up, you're really ready to go. And again, no data library. It only works with MIP, so it's automatically knowing where to attach itself to your MIP database for use in building these Excel-based reports. Licenses for the product are sold in 2 types. Both are named, meaning that they're not concurrent. They are assigned to individual users within your organization. It's not where you can assign as many logins and passwords as you'd like. You have one login and password per seat that can be assigned. A designer seat then would give you the ability to build these reports in DrillPoint, as well as refresh reports in DrillPoint and drill into the reports in DrillPoint. A viewer is going to have the capability to take a pre-built report in DrillPoint and refresh it and drill into it, but they're not going to be able to do any sort of changes or building of reports within DrillPoint. And of course, if you're not a DrillPoint licensed user, you can still receive an Excel sheet that was built with DrillPoint. You're just not going to be able to refresh it or drill into it. Could you go back there, Robbie? We missed a couple things. So reporting controls at the chart of accounts segment level can be embedded in the system using the Abila Advanced Security module. So using the same security module you have for MIP, you can also control what level of account segment detail your users can see in the DrillPoint system in terms of reporting. DrillPoint users do not impact your MIP licenses. So when you purchase DrillPoint and designer and viewer licenses, you are not impacting any of your licenses within the MIP product. It works, as I mentioned earlier, with both advanced and the on-premise versions of MIP, and it is available in multi-user and single-user packages. So beyond today's demo, follow-up survey will appear and give you the opportunity to let us know what additional information you might need in terms of pricing, in terms of product questions, functional questions, what types of training are available. All those questions, as well as access, as I mentioned, to this recorded demonstration, will be made available to you if you would just notate in the survey. That way, when we pass your information to either your partner or to your Abila CAM, they'll know what information to contact you with. So with that, I will turn the presentation back over to Robbie and have him take you through the product.
All right, great. Thanks, Bob. So let me get my report up here running. Okay, again, just as a welcome, thanks everyone for joining us this afternoon. I'm going to be taking you through some of the highlights of the DrillPoint Reports product. We're going to kind of look at it in two phases. First phase we're going to look at is really more in the reporting mode in terms of once you run and refresh your report, whether you're a designer or a viewer, kind of what the report's going to look like, you know, in the drill down capabilities within that specific report. And then we'll kind of switch gears and kind of look at the report from a designer's perspective. And typically your designers are going to be the folks that are in the accounting department or the finance department that are actually going to be creating these report templates for the users within the system to be able to use. So with that, we're going to jump right in. This report that I've got here on the screen, you can see it's a standard revenue and expense report. So if you kind of look at the layout, even though I'm in Excel, I still have this nice looking report. And as Bob mentioned early on, DrillPoint works as an Excel add-in. So once you install DrillPoint, the next time you come into Excel, you're going to have this additional menu item at the top. So with this menu item up here, this is going to give you all the functions that you need to work within the DrillPoint system. Okay. Now, depending upon whether or not you're a designer or a viewer, this ribbon bar options are going to look a little bit different. So I'm logged in as a designer, but if I was logged in as just a viewer, I wouldn't have the ability to even see this section here in my menu that says maintenance. So these items are strictly for your designers. So we've made the interface very streamlined as well to avoid any confusion from people that are using the system. Okay. So just to take a quick peek at this report, you can see that, as I mentioned, it's a standard revenue and expense report. If you look at the revenue section, you can see that I've created kind of some subcategories underneath revenue. And I have complete control over this layout, and we'll look at that when we get to the design function. And then the same thing under the expenses. If I scroll down, you can see I've got some different classifications of expenses. And then the report columns themselves, you can see these first couple columns are pulling actual, but you can see that I'm actually pulling two different time frames, right? I'm pulling the prior period based on the report date when I run the report, and then I'm pulling budget, right, for that same time frame. Now, one thing that we'll look at too that you'll really like about when you're setting up these columns for the report themselves, one of the flexibility features of DrillPoint is the ability for each column on the report to have its own time frame or time period. Okay, so traditionally when you're running reports, that report kind of has a time frame, right? Here's the start date, here's the end date, everything sort of falls within those parameters on the report. But a lot of times what you're going to want to do is be able to kind of build reports that look at historical information as well, so that you can kind of compare where you've been historically versus where you are now. So with DrillPoint, you have the ability to do that type of thing right on within the same report. Okay, and then you can see I've got some Excel formulas in here as well to calculate my variances. So every type of Excel functionality that you might be used to using, all of that's going to be available to you here as well. So not only can you build the reports that are pulling your information in real time, you're also getting the formatting that's available to you in Excel, and you're getting any formulas or functions that's available to you. And again, the really great thing about DrillPoint is that you build this report layout one time. From that point forward, you just simply refresh the report every time you want to see updated results. So now if you're running reports in MIP and you're exporting them out to Excel, after you export them every time, you're having to do that same exercise over and over again, right? You're having to, put it in the proper format. You're having to add any formulas or formatting that you kind of want to have within that report. So we're going to eliminate all of that. You do it one time and save it, and then you're going to get that same look and feel every single time you run the report. Okay. Now let's scroll down to the expense section of the report. I'm looking at this adult seniors program amount, and I'm seeing this actual amount here for that time period. Well, I want to know what makes up that amount on my report. So if I click on the number within there, first thing that it does is it brings me to a drill down screen that loads all of the general ledger detail for that amount on the report. Okay, so you can see your total. You can see all of the individual transactions that make up that amount. Okay. Now, this information, you can do some things with it. You can sort or summarize on any column, or you can do some sorting and summarizing on any segment combination of the transaction. So for example, what if I actually wanted to see this drill down now grouped by fund and grant? I could simply do summarize segment, choose my fund segment, choose my grant segment, and tell it to sort and summarize. Then when I do that, it puts the grid, it reorders the grid and groups my combination of fund and grant, and then gives me a subtotal at each combination of fund and grant. I can scroll down and see that and that. Okay. I can also copy the grid. What that would do is that would take the general ledger detail and put it on a separate sheet within the report. Okay. Or I could print a hard copy of the drill down, either to a PDF that maybe I'm going to email off to someone for further analysis, or just simply printing that to a PDF to be saved. Okay. Now, this is the top level general ledger detail. So what if we needed to see even more information about the GL detail? Well, that's really easy to do in DrillPoint, all from one place. So let's take this accounts payable invoice as an example. I'm going to click on the invoice number here, which is 1014. When I click on that invoice number, now it brings up information about that invoice. So on this first tab, we can see all of the AP stuff. So the invoice number, date, description, vendor, and all that stuff. And we can see the expense distribution that was entered into MIP when we actually entered this bill in to be paid. Okay, that's on the first tab. Second tab we have here is the payments tab. So this will basically show you whether or not this has been paid, and in this case it has. It also shows us the check number that paid it, and it's reporting to us that we've reconciled this check through our reconciliation process on this date. If we're curious about the check details, we can always click on the check number as well. And now we're looking at the cash information, or the allocation of the cash on the specific check that went to this vendor to pay for that. Okay. We also link to the purchase order and encumbrance system within MIP. So if you're doing like requisitions and purchase orders, you can see those as well. So what we're showing here is that there was a purchase order that's linked to this invoice. If we want to see the PO details, we simply click on the purchase order number. Now we can see everything about the purchase order. Over on the items tab of the purchase order, we can also see that there was a requisition attached. If I click on the electronic requisition number, now it brings up all the requisition, including the history as to when it was put in and when it was given approval. Okay. And then, of course, we also have attachments as well. So if you're using the MIP attachment feature, you have access to those documents within DrillPoint as well. So you can actually view those right on the screen. Okay. So just to kind of summarize again, we ran this report. We had a question about the number, so we drilled and we saw the first level of detail, which was the GL information or the GL transactions. But from there, for each transaction in the system, we could drill into that and see all of the other corresponding information as it relates to that transaction. And we were able to do that all in one place, right here within the report, rather than having to go to multiple places within the accounting system to see those level of details, right? So if you're thinking about DrillPoint not only for your internal use there in the accounting department, because it's going to be able to quickly give you your advanced reports that you might be spending a lot of time on, think about the ability to really push this out to your viewers within the organization, people like your department managers, your grant managers, your program managers, all of that type of thing. This is going to give them the ability, they can run their report, security can be applied so that they're not going to bypass anything that you don't want them to be able to see. And then if they have questions about what's on the report, they can simply drill into the information to get answers to their question. So that should take quite a bit of burden off of the accounting department. Okay? Now, one thing I didn't mention at the beginning is a housekeeping thing. Over on the right-hand side of your screen, in the chat window, there's a section there or an area that's called questions. What we're going to do during the overview is we encourage you to enter your questions into that part of the chat box, and we will pause periodically throughout the presentation to answer those questions. Okay, so again, over on the right-hand side, make sure you're using the question section. So as we're going through, if you have questions, make sure you put those in there. Then at the end of the presentation today, if you have questions that maybe you weren't able to enter into the chat area there that you want to verbally ask, what we'll ask you to do is to raise your hand, and that's in the same location on the chat, and then we'll take you off mute and allow you to ask those questions. Okay, so I apologize for failing to mention that at the beginning of the overview, but we do welcome your questions as we're going through this. Okay, so that drill down that I showed you, as I mentioned, is available not only in the actuals, but it's also available in your budget as well. So you can see I'm pulling my budget amount here. So if I wanted to see all the budget transactions that come up to that total, I can drill into that. And just like we did with the accounts payable invoice, we can click on that budget, and we can actually see the budget transaction journal entry that was created. Okay, you can see it's showing that this was transferred in from a budget worksheet, right? So we can see all of that information right here on the screen and make that available to us, okay? All right, let me pause here briefly and check to see, do we have any questions so far?
There are no questions at this point.
All right. So one thing, too, that I want to show you is you notice down at the bottom of my report here, I've got multiple tabs of information, right, or different sheets. Even though I'm in one Excel document, I can actually have multiple reports within that one document. So think about maybe for your board packet, maybe you've got a series of reports that you need to run for your board packet meeting, and you can actually put all of those in one Excel document and have those reports on different sheets. So what I've got here, this is my, my revenue and expense report. I also have a balance sheet that I've done here as well. So this is my updated balance sheet, okay, on this tab. And then here's something that I love about DrillPoint too, is that I like to see things more visual. So what I've done here within DrillPoint is I've created a dashboard tab. So down here at the bottom, I'm going to click on my dashboard, and now look what it does. It shows me these charts that I have set up, okay, in advance. Now, once I set these charts up and I link these charts to these other reports within the workbook, every time I refresh the report, the dashboards are going to get updated in real time, okay? So now I don't have to worry about every single time I'm ready for my board meeting or to run this report. I don't have to create these charts every time over and over again. Create them one time, make them look the way I need them to look, link it to the report, and then going forward, it's a very easy process of simply just refreshing the different reports that I have within my workbook. And as I refresh those, as I mentioned, they're going to update my dashboard. So I can see all of that information here right on the fly. Okay.
We have a couple of questions, Robbie.
Okay.
First question, can someone drill down and have access to the Abila information even if they do not have the Abila software on their computer?
Yes, we have, well, let me take a step back. There's two options. The default option for DrillPoint once it's installed is that it actually connects to the MIP database via your MIP workstation setting. So when you install MIP workstation to access MIP, DrillPoint is using those settings. If you do not have MIP loaded on your system, in other words, you're not an MIP user, we do have an optional module which is called the connector, DrillPoint connector. That's used so that you can actually install DrillPoint on a computer that doesn't typically have access to MIP. So it's done for that reason, and the connector module is also used typically in larger organizations too that are going to have lots of viewers, because they don't want to have to go around and install both DrillPoint and MIP for that user. They can simply install DrillPoint with the connector module, and then that gives you some advanced connection settings.
The other question we have is it possible to use DrillPoint to upload budget data into MIP?
So DrillPoint is a one-way street. It doesn't write information back. However, we have lots of clients that are using DrillPoint to actually come up with their budget, right? Because it'll actually extract both budget information from the history and any actual information. So what we've seen is that they're using that to basically create their starting point for their budget in that budget process, and then they can apply whatever types of formulas to that information and then come up with their new budget. From that point, then you can use the standard importing capability of MIP to import those budget transactions right into the system. Any other questions, Bob?
Nope, that was it.
All right. So let's now kind of switch gears. I'm going to go back from my reporting mode, which is what this is in, back to the design mode. Okay, so there's two modes. We're in report refreshed mode, but now I'm going to go back to report design. So now when I go back to report design, you can see the report looks a little bit different. So this is the actual template that the designer will create. Okay, and then once you refresh the report, then we're going to get the results that you've just seen on the screen. But let's talk about real quickly what are the components of building and creating a report in DrillPoint. We've tried to make it as easy as we can, and as Bob mentioned, we wanted to sort of adhere to what you're used to using and seeing within the base MIP's reporting system. Okay, so there's two components to every report that you're going to build within DrillPoint. Component one is something that we refer to as the FRO. That stands for Financial Report Outline. Okay, so every report has to have an FRO. Now, the equivalent to that within the base MIP reporting system is the financial statement format. Okay, So what you're seeing here in column A is the outline, is the FRO for this specific report. And just like in MIP, where you can create your own custom statement formats, same thing applies over here in DrillPoint. You have full control over creating these layouts so that you can include the sections and the subsections and categories and so forth that you want to see in the layout. But what you're going to see with DrillPoint is that we're giving you many, many more options here to be able to kind of do some groupings and filterings within sections of the report themselves. Okay, so that's step one, is to build the layout. And then from that point, the second component is you simply have to add whatever columns that you need or you want on the report. Okay, so, and you can see again right here, I've got several different columns, and we'll take a look at the different types of columns that you can add to a report. Okay, now one thing I want to point out here, we're in design mode. So when you see these two columns right here, columns B and C, I've asked for it to pull the account number and then the account description in these two columns, okay? But if you notice, this one says in design mode, it says GL. That represents the segment for my grouping in that section. But then down at the bottom in the expense section, it says program. DrillPoint gives you the flexibility to be able to determine for each section on the report what segment of your chart you want to use as your grouping. Okay, you can even combine segments if you want to create a grouping, right? So rather than having just a single segment grouping, you can say, for example, in this grant revenue, what if I wanted to say I wanted to see not only the GL account but also wanted to see the grant? So I can set that up, and basically what I'm doing is I'm taking the segments of my chart and I'm putting them together and creating more of a linear account number, okay? And that, again, that gives you a lot more flexibility with your grouping, and that's controllable, as I mentioned, from one section of the report to the next, okay? All right, so we talked about the FRO, so let's take a look at what that looks like. So as a designer, you'll have access to this report maintenance area. So when I click on report maintenance, it pops up a list of all of the layouts that I've created, okay, for this organization. The one that I'm using on this report is this second one here, the one that I'm calling basic revenue and expense. If I edit that, this takes me to the design window for that layout, okay? So this is where I'm going to build my report layout. This is where I'm going to add all sections that I need to add and in the subcategories that I need to add underneath that, okay? Now, after you add the different sections to the report, then you have to tell DrillPoint what you want to go in that section of the report, okay? Now, I've highlighted this grant revenue area, so now I need to define what I consider to be grant revenue for this report. So I'm going to edit that category. When I click on edit, you can see it pops up a form, and basically all I'm having to do here is make selections on a form to set up these outlines, okay? You'll notice that nothing about this looks technical. DrillPoint knows everything about your organization's database. It knows what your chart of accounts looks like. It knows all the segments. It knows all the values of those segments. It also knows your closing account assignments as well. So if you're running reports here in DrillPoint and you're crossing fiscal years, that's not a problem for DrillPoint. It handles that automatically by reading what your closing account assignments are, and it knows what your GL fiscal start date and end date is. So that's not anything that you have to add, set up, or configure. It's reading that automatically from what's already been designed within your MIP system. Okay? Now, let's kind of work our way down. I'm going to skip over this grouping because we've really already talked about that. This is the ability to tell it what segment you want to use as the grouping. And as you can see, you can do multiple segments and put them together. Where I want to focus, though, is down here in the filter section. This filter section is where you're telling DrillPoint what to put in this section when the report gets ran. Okay? Now, you'll notice right here on this first tab we have segments. So this loads in all of the segments of your chart. So that's probably the first thing that you've noticed is that when you're in MIP and you're creating a financial statement format, once you add a category there, there's a tab there that says Assign Accounts. When you click on that Assign Accounts tab, the only option you have for mapping transactions for that section is by GL account, right? But look what we've done here. We pulled in all of the segments of your chart, and we're giving you the ability to use either a single segment, or you can use a series of your segments or multiple segments to restrict what's going to go into this section of the report, okay? So this one's pretty basic, right? I'm pulling in information as long as the transaction was posted to a GL account that falls within this range, okay? That's another really great thing, too, about DrillPoint is that you don't have to specify each individual account. You could specify a range. That way, if you add a new account within that range, it's going to automatically get picked up within DrillPoint the next time you run that report, okay? So now let's kind of build a matrix for a filter, okay? So what I want to do now is I want to add also my fund filter. So I also want to restrict what's going to go into this section by a specific fund. So if I click on the fund list, you can see it brings me up a list of all of my funds. So I'm going to pick my general fund here. So now what happens is that it's only going to go into this section if it's transactioned to fund 1 in any of these two or within these two GL account range, okay? Now, that's one way to do it. That's the segment filtering. We also are making use of the MIP user-defined fields, okay? So that's an MIP function. One of the types of user-defined fields that you can have within MIP is what we call a segment user-defined field. So the idea there is that you add a custom field and you can put it on a specific segment, right, of your chart. So what we've done here is we've created one for the grant segment that we called category. So that gives us the ability, every time we add a new grant to the system, we can put it in a specific category. And in this example, my 3 choices of categories were state, federal, and local. So over in DrillPoint, guess what I can do? I can come over here and say, you know what, I want to filter because I only want certain types of grants to come into this section of the report. So I'm going to click on my grant category, and I'm going to say include, and then if you look at the selected value, it's pulling all of this, again, from my MIP setup and from the UDF automatically. So then I'm going to pick the value state grant. So now look what we've done. We said, okay, the criteria for this section is Fund 1, these 2 GL account ranges, and the grant also has to be a state grant. The advantage, again, for using a UDF would be if I add a new grant to my system and it's a state grant, as long as I put it in the proper category when I set it up in MIP, it's going to automatically get picked up and included in that section of the report, okay? And then the third and final way is by using the MIP reporting groups. You're all probably familiar with those. Many of you are probably using those now when you're running reports, and you're using those as your column groupings and filters. So we've done the same thing over here in DrillPoint, but what we've done is we said, well, rather than having those restricted only to the columns, we're allowing you to say, okay, I've set up these reporting groups, but I want to use that reporting group setup as my filter for this section or that row of the report. And if you set those up, you can look in a drop down here, see it's pulling those in real time for me. I don't have to, you know, remember what those were. So all of those are going to be set up and available for me automatically over here, okay? So really, that's building your layout. Once you create your layout and you save it, you can actually copy the layout and then modify it as a different version, okay? So we've given you some tools here as you're working within DrillPoint, creating these layouts. You don't have to create these from scratch every time. Get your base one set up. From that point forward, then you can kind of start modifying that base template, okay? All right, let me pause here for just a second, and we'll get Bob to check to see if we have any questions on any of that.
No questions.
Okay, so back to my report. That's our outline. Then you simply start adding columns to the report. Okay, so let's jump over here to column D, which is an actual column. Okay, so I'm going to click on report columns up here at the top. What this does is this brings up the column definition for the specific column that I'm on. And you can see I'm on column D. And there's three things that you have to assign in order to create a column within DrillPoint. The first one is the definition. So you're going to give it a title. And you can see I've put in these keywords here. That way every time you refresh the report, that date range is going to change, right, based on the report date. So DrillPoint's going to automatically put the time frame for this column in on the fly, okay? And then it wants to know what type of column. So if I drop down my type list here, you can see the different types of columns I can have. Actual, encumbrance by itself, combine the two. I can have budget. This FRO grouping and segment, these are what you're seeing in columns B and C, okay? This is pulling from the setup within the outline. The UDF, we've already really kind of talked about that, but that also gives you the ability, by using a transaction user-defined field in MIP, you can start doing kind of statistical-based reporting as well by pulling in more statistical information into your reports. Or is this just an Excel column, okay? We're going to pick actual for this column, and we're going to do net activity. So we're not going to do beginning or ending balance. Here we're just going to show net activity. Then we go to the date range. This is what I was referring to earlier about each column can have its own time frame. So when you look at the period drop-down list here, the first three items you see, month, quarter, and year, those are relative periods based on your geofiscal year, okay? So this company or this database that I'm working in today for this demonstration is on a calendar fiscal year, January to December, okay? So when I pick year in this period drop-down, DrillPoint automatically knows that I'm talking about January to December. If I want the year to date instead of the whole year, I can check this box right here. And this will cut off the year period as of the report effective date, okay? Now, here's where the flexibility comes into play. Rather than having to come into this report and hard code this date range or change it every time I run it, what I do is I simply use a relative period option. So every time you refresh a report, when you click refresh, the first thing that it has on that refresh screen is a field called effective date. So it wants to know what the effective date is of the report. That effective date is basically your baseline for the report. Okay, so that's what all of the columns are going to be based on. So in this example, I ran this report, and I believe I used the date of June 30th, 2011. Okay, so what DrillPoint did is it looked at that year of the effective date and saw that it was 2011, and then it looked at this and saw that this was set to -1. So this is always going to put the prior year to date in this column based on the date that I provide at runtime, just by simply having that as a -1. If I wanted this to be 2 years ago, I could simply make that -2 and so on. Okay, so you can see what you can do is now you can kind of start building trend reports, right, that are showing you activity over a period of time. Okay, and you have those same things available to you not only for a year, but if you want to see things on a monthly basis, you can choose that as well, or quarterly basis. This fourth type is an explicit date range. So if you have some kind of odd or unique date range that you're looking for within that column, you can simply you can hard code the start and the end date there. Okay, and then we have this last one, which is called custom column. This is really a what I call the catch-all date time period. This will do things like, okay, look at the report effective date that I've given it. I want you to go back from that date, maybe 5 years, and then I want you to come all the way up to the prior year. So in essence, what I'm doing is I'm getting a cumulative total for the prior 5 years. And then maybe I want to divide that by 5 to get my 5-year average. Okay, so I'm going to report the 5-year average in one column. Next column might be my current year, and then the third column might be a variance that's showing me where we are in the current year versus where we've been historically over the past 5 years. Okay, so that's your date range. Then you have the same filtering capability at the column level as you did at the row or section level. Okay, so if you wanted to pick your groupings or your filtering by segments or combination of segments by user-defined fields, or if you want to use a reporting group filter for that column, you can simply do that as well. Okay. Now, the only difference between column D and column E is going to be set up exactly the same, except if I go over here to date range, look what this is set to relative period of 0. That means it's always going to report the current period based on the effective date that's given to the report when I run it and refresh it. Okay, so every time you run and refresh the report, simply by changing the report effective date, that will impact the time period for every column on the report dynamically and on the fly without you having to come in there and change each one every time you run that report. Okay, this last column that we'll look at is a budget column. We're to show you when you pick budget here as the column type, the budget version drop-down enables itself. So if I do a drop-down, this is going to show me all of the budget versions. So I can even run reports that have multiple budget versions in each column, okay, if I wanted to do that as well. So more flexibility, and same thing with the time frame here. I can pull a budget based on any time period that I have within my MIP system very easily. Okay? And then these other columns are nothing more than just simply, you can see they're Excel formulas. That's all I've done is I've built Excel formulas in these other columns. Okay? All right, let's pause here and ask any questions, Bob?
Yes. There's a question, can a 5-year comparative report be formatted with 5 individual years displayed?
Yes, it can. So what you would do is in the column setup is you would have 5 columns, right? And the time frame would be year. The first column over here on the far left, if you wanted that to be the 5 years ago, right, that would be set to -5, like this, okay? Then you would repeat, you would have an identical column next to that, and it would be set to -4, and then the next one -3, and so on. So you could see each one of those individually, and then you can have a column if you wanted to total all 5 of those years and then maybe do an average. You could certainly do that as well. Any other questions, Bob?
No other questions.
Okay. All right. Well, it looks like we've got about 15 minutes left within the overview.
We actually have another question, Robbie. Another question just popped up here. So what's the difference between explicit and custom dates? Can you not set up the same dates in each part?
So the custom date range over here, the custom date range is more flexible because it allows you to modify the time period for this column by simply changing the effective date on the report. Whereas explicit date range ignores the effective date when you run the report and simply adheres to the start and the end date that you have here within the definition of that column itself. Okay, so one is more dynamic that changes based on the effective date, whereas this one stays, the explicit one stays static. It never changes based on the values that you've put in the start and the end date. Other questions?
That's it for the moment.
Okay. One other thing I want to mention too about DrillPoint and about these reports, and something that I really love too as well, we always get the question asked, can you have other information that's really not part of your report, but you need to include that as part of your report? For example, can you have statistics or other things that you use in conjunction with the reports? The answer to that is absolutely yes. What I've seen a lot is that an organization may come over here and create a new tab, right? And they may call that tab something like lookup. Maybe that's what they call it. And then on that, they may put some statistics, like if they, I'm just going to list out a couple programs, 101, 201. We know those are our program numbers. And then maybe we want to make these percentage columns, and then maybe we want to put, 5% and 8%. So then over here on the report, I can actually do a VLOOKUP command which says, okay, when I refresh the report, come over here and whatever program is on the report, what I want you to do is I want you to come over here and find what its percentage is. And then I want you to put that value in that column right here, because then I'm going to use that in a formula that I'm going to take whatever my actual was and multiply it by that percentage for that program, and I want the amount to be shown here. Okay. So again, more flexibility simply because we're using Excel. So all of that type of Excel activity is available to you as well. So you really can do more than just your standard, financial reporting that you're used to getting right now out of the base MIP system. It really opens up a whole myriad of doors and windows for you to be able to do a lot of really, really cool things with your reporting.
Another question, can we set up these templates so that the user selects the time frame?
Yes. So one thing I didn't show you at the top here at DrillPoint is when I set up the columns, I've set up all the periods, right? But the way those get impacted is when I click Report Refresh up here at the top. This is the screen that pops up for the end user, and this is where they would change the effective date right here. Once they change the effective date, click Next and then Refresh, that's then going to impact the columns on the report, okay? So when I ran this report a few minutes ago, I got January 1 to June 30th, 2010 in this column, and I got January 1 to June 30, 2011 in that column. Well, if I change this to say, like 2012, or even if I change that and run the report, the results now would be in this column, I would get January to July 30th, 2011 in this column, and this column would be January 1 to July 30th, 2012. Okay, so that's how that works. But yes, this screen is available to the person that's refreshing the report every time they refresh it. And you can see that they can also apply some other filters at runtime. So in this example, when I refreshed the report, I restricted it. Even though I can restrict within the report itself as a designer, I could restrict certain programs. I may want to leave that more wide open and not restrict it, but give the person running the report the ability to select these filters at runtime, right? Now, don't get nervous that because they could come here and say, for example, let's say they were only in charge of a certain program. Even if they were to come here and try to select a program that you've not given them access to, DrillPoint will not report that for them on the report. Okay, so that security is going to be locked down, so you don't have to worry about them being able to bypass that by simply picking a program here in the filter that they don't have access to.
So we have another question. Are we able to do balance sheet period comparisons?
Yes, same thing over here on the balance sheet. Okay, you can see this report's showing me my beginning balance, net activity, and ending balance. But the same type of thing is here as well. You can specify the time period that you want to look at on a balance sheet. So yeah, like you said, if you want to look at multiple years of a balance sheet, you could simply have those in each column and say, look at that as a 5-year comparison. That's a great exercise maybe, to look at your cash. Maybe you want to see what your cash trends have been over a 5-year period, something like that. That gives you the ability to do that through the balance sheet. One other thing I want to mention here too is over here on the stress test design, what I've done here is I've created a real quick report because a lot of organizations need to know kind of what their cash position is going to be, not in the current period, but really forward-looking, right? And so a lot of times you can base that based on, some averages. And in this case, what I've done is I've done a 3-year average of my cash, accounts payable, and my payroll expenses. And then I've used that in a formula to come up with with a percentage of a ratio, okay? So in this case, my ratio for this organization based on the time frame is 66.64. And back over on my dashboard, you can see we set a goal to never fall below a 48% ratio for our cash stress test. So every time I refresh my reports, again, it's going to update this chart. So visually, I can always see that we're in good shape. If we were ever to fall below the 48%, I would quickly be able to see that and maybe take some corrective action ahead of time to make sure that our cash flow stays where it needs to stay in order for us to operate at our optimal levels. Okay, so again, just another type of thing that DrillPoint gives you the flexibility to do, because as you can see on this report, we're able to combine balance sheet accounts and expense accounts all on the same report and then do some analysis based on those.
Another question, can this DrillPoint product access payroll information?
It does not access payroll info direct, but anything that you post from your payroll system to the general ledger is accessible through here. So for example, let's say, you posted your payroll, so you're looking at your payroll expense, you drill into the first number, and then you wanted to actually see that payroll entry, you could drill into the payroll journal entry from that point. So through drill down, you can get to some of that. But it doesn't do things like, okay, pull in this employee and give me their year-to-date earnings and their withholdings and stuff like that. It's limited currently to just general ledger information.
And can you create a macro for a VLOOKUP on DrillPoint?
I suppose so. I don't know that we have, or I've seen anyone that's done that before, but I don't really see any reason why you couldn't. So I guess what you're asking is you run and refresh the report, and then you do a macro that you've recorded that does the VLOOKUP command. You could certainly do that, or you could put the VLOOKUP command in advance in a column in design mode, and then by putting it here, like say for example, if I put a VLOOKUP command on this row, but I wanted that to apply to the entire grant revenue section, when this report gets ran and this section expands from one row to two rows because I have two GL accounts in this category, it will actually copy that VLOOKUP command down for me. So a lot of times you don't really need to use a macro for the VLOOKUP. Although, like I said, I'm not aware of anyone that I know of that's actually used a macro to do that, but I don't see why it couldn't be accomplished if you wanted to do it that way.
All right, and the final question here, sometimes grants run between 2 fiscal years. Can you pull data from the 2 fiscal periods?
Yeah, yes. Yes, and this does cross fiscal year reporting on your grants, same as you can do within the base MIP system. Any other questions? All right, we've got, I don't know, 5 minutes left or so. Maybe you had a question that was a little more difficult to enter into the question section there. If you'd like to verbally ask a question, feel free to raise your hand, and I'll be glad to take you off mute, and we'll go ahead and take that question for you.
Here's another typed-in question, Robbie. Once created, can the reports be saved as a static standalone report?
Yes, they can. You just do File, Save As, and give it a unique name. Let me qualify that though. Once you save it as a static report, you cannot drill down into the detail. It would only be a static report from the front top level of what the report looked like. The drill down is only available right after you refresh the report. Okay, so if you're planning, to give these out to like department heads or something like that, certainly you could run the report for them and email it to them, and they'd be able to see the finished product. However, they would not have any drill down capability to see anything underneath the numbers on the report. Any other questions? Very good. Well, I'm going to go ahead and turn it back over to Bob for just a couple closing comments. And again, I'd like to thank everyone for joining us this afternoon for our DrillPoint Reports webinar.
Okay, well, hopefully everybody was able to see some of the features of DrillPoint. Obviously, there may be additional specific questions that you have. Certainly in the survey that you'll get as you complete today's webcast, let us know what additional information you want. We do have the ability to provide you, again, a copy of this webcast, and we'll make sure that your CAM or your partner has access to the recording that they can forward to you. And with that, I will wish everybody a good rest of the day, and we'll hopefully speak with you in the future. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.